Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I do art on ShawNshawN.co and also specials on eBay. Today we're going to review At Eternity's Gate. So this is a movie by Julian Schnabel. This is the director. You have Willem Dafoe as Vincent Van Gogh, Theo Van Gogh, his brother as Rupert Friend, and Paul Gauguin is played by Oscar Isaac. So it has kind of the story of Vincent Van Gogh from the time he knows he's a serious painter up into his death in the south of France. So some of the scenes that Vincent tried to paint from a landscape perspective, and what kind of led up to him cutting his ear off. Later, how he was, he committed suicide, he committed death. So they cover those three elements. So it's just interpretation based on what the material they have. Style-wise, the director chose to use kind of the shaky camera effect. So you're talking and it's moving around and you're like, what the fuck, dude? That's so annoying, dude. Like, to use it a little bit is okay, but there's movies where they do the whole stupid movie like that. Like that stupid Jason Bourne Identity is like, oh, stop moving the camera. So anyway, I'm not a big fan of the shaky camera. They used it quite a bit here, I think overly much, so you just want to kind of turn your face away because it's just so... It's just shaking too much. You're like, Like, no one wants to watch the film like that, dude. Another thing they did is in some scenes, they kind of blur about this much of the screen off, the third bottom of the screen for some reason, to show that Vincent saw the world in a different light or something. Like, he had vision problems. I don't know. I think if you want to use kind of a painterly interpretation, I'd have maybe him squint and then have the screen grade variation. Hey, what if we paint it more blue or red, and then have him start painting that, right? That may have been... or over chroma the colors, so really heighten the prime colors within what you see, and then you say, oh, this is what Vincent's seeing. That, I think that would have made more sense, and then you'd have someone else look at the sky and be like, where do you get this from? So that would have been really cool interpretation. They just tried to do it with this blurry 1/3, which didn't work for me. So there's quite a bit of what I would say missing parts, and it's quite a long film. It's almost 2 hours, an hour and 51, which is okay. It's just a little over an hour and a half. Time-wise, it's okay, but one of the missing parts is Van Gogh wrote letters at least once a week. Between when he decides to become an artist to his death, he writes 900 letters in 18 years. So he's writing once a week, all the time, writing his thoughts, his analysis, his critiques, his self-doubting, He reads one letter in this movie. Like, dude, that was the basis. Like, back then, there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, there's no email, most people don't even have typewriters. He's handwriting this out. They dropped that completely, and they don't have him writing to Theo reading this and being like, oh my god, what's wrong with Van Gogh? And so they don't have this back and forth between Theo and Van Gogh in the letters, and that's a major part of Van Gogh's life. How could you... It's like saying someone doesn't sleep, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I think there was a lot of potential they could have showed with the letter writing and the analysis and how it's getting interpreted. They did show one exhibition where he gets analyzed and Van Gogh's like, oh wow, this is great. And then later he thinks, oh, it's not so great. So I think they should have had a lot more of those critiques, people going to the shows where Van Gogh's art is being shown, or other post-impressionals are being shown, and how they're interpreting that, and how the artists are having crises and writing back and forth between each other, because that's what an artist goes through. There's a lot of criticism, especially when you're filtering it through this, kind of breaking through this gallery world to get shown. So luckily Van Gogh didn't have that because he had his brother showing it, but Theo didn't have any luck selling his work. So, but yeah, that's all missing. So none of the none of the other artists' reactions. A little bit from Gauguin. They talk a little bit why Van Gogh kind of leaves from Paris down to the south of France. But it's really just a one kind of sentence thing, and there's no... I think what they should have done in the Act 1 is just done his Paris life. How did he get established? How did he become this great, from kind of like an amateur to boom, he's a serious artist, and he's kind of getting into the Paris scene. Then Act 2, which they did correctly, which was go to south of France. Act 3, cut his ear, and then up to his death, right? And so they kind of cover those basic sections, but again, no letters. Another thing they didn't have was the reactions of Van Gogh to other painters like Monet, Seurat, the early Impressionists. What they did is they show him walking around the Louvre, and he's looking at old master painting, which he did, obviously, but he was following the Impressionists. He totally threw out that old stuff, went from the Impressionists, and he made into post-Impressionism. So they should have showed Seurat's work, his interpretation of Seurat, Monet's work, what he thought of Monet, how did Gauguin think about Monet? Well, they have a little bit of that conversation, but they probably should have showed that maybe they're in a museum. It wouldn't have made sense as far as the realism that he met Gauguin in the south of France, but they could have had that, like, oh, he's having this discussion back and forth with letters, and then, hey, did you see this museum? And then flip back to, they should have had the letter on top of the exhibit, and they could have had the exhibit in the background, and the letter kind of going through and reading the letter. You're talking out loud. It's hard to follow, but it's kind of how the people thought back then with letters. It's a very literal society versus a visual society. We're more in a visual society with YouTube, and that was a literal society with a lot of text space. So you should have this text here, dude. You're missing the text. I know it's film, but dude. So my overall thing is, I just thought the director just had no idea how Vincent Van Gogh's work fit into the rest of the art world, that's how Vincent Van Gogh is famous, dude. Like, you have to understand that he wasn't painting realism and why he wasn't painting realism, and he was coming from Impressionism. He went into Post-Impressionism, and he's one of the defining members of the Post-Impressionist group, and you're like, you're not really defining this, and you don't define what other interpretation like Seurat, they talk about a little bit, but again, there should have been more like visual, dude. Art is visual. Just show the freaking paintings, Monet's paintings, Seurat's paintings. Have them at an exhibition, or interpreting exhibition. That would have been great. That you would have got a better feel. Or showing a magazine. He's flipping through a magazine. Oh my God, they think this. They don't have that. I just felt like the director didn't research anything of Van Gogh. He just said, "Oh, Van Gogh's famous. I'll cover him." And you're like, dude, there's all these letters. There's countless books on Post-Impressionism. There's countless books on Van Gogh. It's like, do your research, man. This sucks. I think Willem Dafoe, he looks like Van Gogh. He's probably 10 years older than he probably should be to play Van Gogh. Like, probably when he was playing Platoon, between Platoon and now, he probably should have been somewhere in that midpoint would have been the best time to interpret Van Gogh, because Van Gogh was in his 30s when he dies, right? And Vincent and Dafoe's kind of 40s, 50s. You're looking his age, right? But he gives it kind of that gritty, he's outdoors, and Dafoe has that look now that he's getting older. So, Vincent Van Gogh would have aged faster because he's always outdoors. So maybe that kind of works. I think, emotionally and, the potential to do the acting was there from Dafoe. And I think he captures a lot of him painting and that kind of his struggles between people. So I think Dafoe does a good job there. Paul Gauguin with, Oscar Isaac, obviously he's a fantastic actor. Again, they skimmed stuff. They have an argument as why Gauguin leaves. They don't show the argument. Hello? Like, dude, that's drama, conflict. That's what they need in this film. Like, it's boring. And this guy's like, it's like, come on, man. You could have had that huge argument, boom, and then Gauguin leaves and it's a disaster. And then, Van Gogh cuts his... It makes sense why Van Gogh cuts his ear. Otherwise, it's just like, it cut off his ear, but we're not going to show you cutting off the ear, and we're not going to show you the argument. What? Really dumb. Maybe they just wanted to do that to keep it PG-13, but it doesn't make any sense. That doesn't fit into the character of Van Gogh. If you cut your ear off, dude, it's a dramatic event. It's a gory event. You can just show the beginning of it, maybe. I don't know, but something, there's no reason why he cuts off his ear. He just shows up one day with a bandage. You're like, it doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, since they cut that gore off and all the build up to that, you don't show the shock of the pre and then the post Vincent from these event, right? It's just visually badly set up. I just thought it was like a really, there was some really good actors in here, and the freaking director just fucked it up, man. I had some potential, but I didn't even feel sad I felt a little sad, but if you want to see a really good Van Gogh movie, go see Loving Vincent. It's kind of a side story of Vincent. It's not really directly on Vincent, but it's about Vincent's life, and that's just so damn freaking good. It's this detective trying to figure out what happened with Vincent Van Gogh, and every scene is the shot of Vincent Van Gogh, and they filmed it and then they converted it into painting, so every scene is a painting. So they took hundreds of artists, it took thousands and thousands of hours, and they stitched this all together, and so every scene in the movie is a painting. It's either black and white, which I think is about the past, and the color if it's the recent in the present, so it's present versus past. So they captured that really well. Just fantastic. And this movie with Willem Dafoe and Oscar Isaac, it had the potential to be as good as that movie because they have live actors, and then they just freaking blew it, dude. But again, this is all up to the director. Just really crappy directing, dude. Bad camera work. The camera guy should have been freaking fired. I mean, they had some good shots on some of the camera shots, but man, all this shaky camera But it really is just a bad story. They just really don't. They strip a lot of meat from the bone to make it kind of this PG-13. You're like, did you strip the whole story where there's no story? No one follows it. It doesn't make sense for the time period. He's spacing out. It's like, no, the guy wrote every freaking week, dude. He was an analyst. He was a critique person. He was thinking deeply about his art, and they just kind of miss this. Like, they're not even artists. And like, how can you be a film director and not know about freaking art? You're just a freaking idiot. So, thumbs down on this. You want to thumbs down my review? Go for it. I hope it thumbs up, but hope you avoid this movie. If you want to subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next movie.